The air around the Plath family has always been thick with secrets, whispers, and control. For years, we've watched them smile on the surface, while something much heavier played out behind the scenes. And then, just when everyone thought they knew their roles, Lydia, the sibling who is always seen as the quiet, obedient daughter, finally found her voice. That moment shook not only her family but also the viewers who had come to expect her silence. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it was powerful, because sometimes the softest voice cuts the deepest. Hi friends, my name is Christine, and this is Inside Hollywood Couples. Welcome back to the channel. If you love seeing the truth behind reality TV families and getting commentary that pulls no punches, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell. And of course, let me know your thoughts in the comments, because I really want to hear how you feel about Lydia stepping into this moment. Now, to really understand why this was such a big deal, you have to think about where Lydia started in this family story. From season 1, Lydia was framed as the good girl. She was the one Kim and Barry could hold up as proof that their strict rules still worked. While Ethan and Olivia were already pulling away, and while Mariah was testing boundaries with her clothes, music, and independence, Lydia was the child who still prayed with her mother, who still talked about obeying God, and who openly worried about her siblings drifting from the path. She wasn't rebellious, and in the Plath household, that made her valuable. But being the good one came with a price. Over and over, we saw Lydia positioned as the family's emotional glue. She was the one her mom leaned on when Kim's marriage to Barry started falling apart. She was the one expected to manage her younger siblings, to play peacemaker between brothers and sisters who were class, hang with their parents, and to hold the family line while the others broke away. At times, it felt like Lydia wasn't just a daughter. She was a stand-in parent, a therapist, and a spiritual guide, all rolled into one. And this is where the gossip started to creep in. The Plath family has always had a complicated relationship with communication. Instead of open, honest conversations, so much of what we saw on Welcome to Plathville played out in whispers, side comments, and judgment behind people's backs. Kim and Barry, for example, didn't sit down with Ethan and Olivia to work through their issues. They whispered about Olivia's influence, they judged her choices, and they let those judgments spread through the family. The siblings did the same with each other. If Mariah went out late, if Micah posed shirtless for modeling, if Ethan didn't come around enough, it all turned into quiet criticism instead of direct conversation. And Lydia, for the longest time, was caught in the middle of all this. She would hear the gossip, she would internalize it, and then she would pray over it, hoping somehow to bring peace. But by keeping quiet, she also kept the cycle going. Because when you don't confront gossip, it grows. And in the Plath family, gossip wasn't just background noise, it was the way control worked. It was how Kim kept her authority. It was how siblings judged each other without having to face conflict head-on. That's what makes Lydia's decision to finally speak so important. It's not that she raised her voice or stormed out like Mariah. It's that she broke character. She was supposed to be the one who never challenged the family dynamic. By speaking, she exposed how much pain had been bottled up and how toxic the constant whispering had become. But before we get to that moment, think about how rare it is in this family for anyone to break free of their role. Ethan has always been the oldest son caught between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to his parents. Mariah has always been the rebel. Micah has built a new life outside, but still dips back in with charm. And Lydia? She was the good soldier. So when she finally steps outside of that, even just to speak honestly, it's a bigger shock than any screaming match could ever be. And that's exactly what I want to walk you through in this video. How gossip and control shaped the Plath family, and how Lydia's voice, quiet but steady, ended up being one of the most powerful forces to challenge that system. When you look back over the seasons of Welcome to Plathville, one pattern stands out more than anything else. People don't talk to each other directly. They talk about each other. That's the heartbeat of the Plath family drama. And it's not harmless chatter. It's a tool of control. Think about Kim and Barry. From the very beginning, their authority wasn't just about strict rules, no sugar, no TV, and no social media. It was about creating a culture where their version of the right path could never be questioned out loud. Instead, doubts or disagreements got filtered through gossip. We saw Kim talk about Olivia as a bad influence instead of sitting down to work out differences. We saw Barry shrug off his kids' independence by making comments to others instead of addressing the child directly. That cycle kept power in the parents' hands because it meant no real confrontation could happen. The siblings picked up the same pattern. When Mariah dyed her hair, when she wore clothes that screamed individuality, the talk wasn't a respectful conversation. It was side comments, sighs, and judgment. When Micah started modeling, there were murmurs about modesty and values. Ethan's marriage became the subject of constant behind-the-back debate. Was Olivia pulling him away? Was he betraying the family? Gossip allowed everyone to have an opinion without ever having to face each other honestly. And this is where Lydia comes into focus. For years, she didn't just hear the gossip, she absorbed it. You could see it in those quiet moments on camera when she looked torn between loyalty to her parents and compassion for her siblings. She prayed over them. She wrote about them in her journal. She carried their struggles on her shoulders. But she never confronted the gossip itself. In fact, sometimes she even repeated it, gently, in a way that seemed caring, but still kept the cycle alive. One example that really shows this dynamic is when Ethan and Olivia cut contact with Kim and Barry. Instead of facing the hurt directly, the family swirled around it with whispers. Some of the siblings repeated the narrative that Olivia was controlling Ethan, while others whispered that Ethan had abandoned the family. Lydia sat in the middle, listening, sympathizing, and carrying the weight, but never actually pushing the family toward honest conversation. And who benefited from all of this? The ones who held the power. Because as long as everyone was whispering instead of speaking, the parents could still frame themselves as victims, or as the righteous ones trying to protect their children. Gossip blurred the truth. Was Olivia really the problem? Or was it the family's inability to let go of control? Was Mariah truly rebelling? Or was she just trying to breathe? The whispers made it easier to blame individuals, rather than face the bigger issue, control itself. For Lydia, this put her in an impossible position. She was constantly asked to pray, to guide, to support. In other words, she was asked to manage the fallout of gossip without ever being allowed to question the source of it. She was the emotional safety net for a system that was already cracking. And that's why Lydia's eventual step into her own voice mattered so much. When someone like Mariah pushes back, the family can dismiss her as rebellious. When Ethan distances himself, they can claim he's been poisoned by outside influence. But when Lydia, the one who was always loyal, always faithful, always on the parent's side, begins to speak, it exposes the truth. The system itself is broken. Gossip isn't keeping the family together, it's tearing them apart. By the time Lydia found the courage to say something real, the ground was already shaking under the Plaths. The divorce between Kim and Barry was public. The siblings were scattered in different directions, each carving out their own lives. The control that once felt unshakable was slipping. And that's when Lydia, of all people, became the one to challenge the silence. If you've been watching Welcome to Plathville closely, you know that weddings are never just about two people getting married. In the Plath family, weddings become battlegrounds. Every decision, the guest list, the music, the outfits, the vows, ends up being filtered through questions of faith, control, and family image. And that's exactly the environment that pushed Lydia into her breaking point. Leading up to the wedding, we saw how the conversations weren't really about celebration. Instead, they were full of whispers and judgments. Kim's so-called concerns sounded protective on the surface, but they were steeped in criticism. Little comments about whether Zach was strong enough, whether Lydia was being naive, whether she was choosing loyalty to a man over loyalty to her family. Those weren't direct confrontations. They were side comments, spread around, calculated to chip away at Lydia's confidence. And it wasn't just Kim. The siblings joined in too, some of them almost unconsciously. Instead of being able to celebrate Lydia's joy, they repeated old patterns. Mariah's past decisions got pulled in as examples of what happens when someone strays. Ethan and Olivia's marriage was raised as a cautionary tale, like a whispered warning. Even Micah's modeling career became a side note in the gossip, proof that choosing independence meant losing the family's blessing. The wedding became less about Lydia's future and more about everyone else's fear. One of the most telling moments was the way Zach himself was discussed. Rather than embracing him as part of the family, there were quiet digs about his personality, about whether he was man enough for Lydia, about whether he would really fit into the mold. These comments weren't made to his face. They floated around Lydia, forcing her to carry the weight of defending him without ever giving her the space to do it openly. That's the destructive power of gossip. It attacks without giving the accused a chance to respond. But here's where Lydia changed the script. For so long, she had been the peacekeeper, the prayer warrior, the one who absorbed all this tension quietly. This time, instead of writing her thoughts in her journal or just praying silently, she decided to speak out. In one scene that caught fans by surprise, Lydia turned to her family and with a calm but steady voice reminded them of the scripture that calls people not to judge, not to gossip, but to love. It wasn't a fiery explosion. It wasn't a dramatic storm-off. It was simple, measured, and sincere. And because it was Lydia, it carried a weight that shouting never could. You could see the reactions on the faces of those around her. Some looked uncomfortable. Some tried to brush it off. But the shift was undeniable. This was Lydia stepping out of the role she had been assigned, the quiet supporter, and into a role where she was defining her own boundaries. She wasn't just asking for respect for herself. She was asking for honesty and respect to replace the cycle of gossip in the family. And fans noticed. The reaction online after that episode was filled with praise for Lydia. People who had often seen her as too quiet or too submissive recognized the courage it took to speak up in that environment. Viewers called it refreshing, powerful, even healing to see her claim her own voice after years of being overshadowed by louder, more rebellious siblings. But inside the family, it wasn't that simple. For people who thrive on control, Lydia's words weren't just a moment of clarity, they were a threat. By calling out gossip directly, she exposed how it worked, how it had poisoned relationships for years. And once the truth is spoken out loud, it can't be unspoken. That's what made this moment at the wedding such a turning point. It wasn't just Lydia defending herself or defending Zach. It was Lydia challenging the entire foundation of how her family communicates. It was her saying, enough of the whispers, enough of the control masked as concern. If we're going to love each other, it has to be out in the open. The moment Lydia chose to speak out might have been calm, but the ripple effects were anything but. For years, her role in the Plath family had been crystal clear. She was the good daughter, the peacemaker, the one who never stepped out of line. When she quoted scripture and gently pushed back against the cycle of gossip, it wasn't just words. It was Lydia rewriting her own identity in front of everyone. What struck fans immediately was her tone. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse anyone directly. She simply reminded her family that gossip is corrosive, that love requires truth, and that faith is about building each other up, not tearing one another down in whispers. Because she rooted her statement in scripture, the very foundation the family had always claimed to follow, it became impossible to dismiss her as rebellious. Lydia was playing by their own rules, but she was exposing how they had broken them. The camera caught the reactions, and those few seconds told a bigger story than any speech could. Kim's face tightened, as if she wanted to wave it off but knew the words hit too close to home. Barry stayed quieter than usual, his body language suggesting discomfort. Some siblings looked conflicted, almost guilty, because they knew they had repeated the gossip Lydia was talking about. That's the power of truth spoken at the right time. It unsettles those who benefit from silence. Outside the family bubble, the audience was captivated. Social media lit up with fans praising Lydia's courage. Viewers said things like, "Finally someone said it," and "This was the most honest moment in the entire season." People who had written her off as timid saw her in a new light. Not weak, but steady, not passive, but quietly strong. And many fans related deeply to her struggle, being the one expected to hold the family together while also carrying the weight of unspoken truths. But if the audience celebrated, inside the Plath circle the reaction was different. Instead of embracing her honesty, some tried to minimize it, brushing it off as Lydia just being sweet or naive. That's the defense mechanism of people who don't want to face themselves. They reduce the truth teller to something small so they don't have to reckon with what was said. Yet the seed was already planted. Once spoken, Lydia's words couldn't be unspoken. In a family built on control and gossip, Lydia's calm defiance mattered because it exposed the cracks. She didn't walk away like Ethan. She didn't rebel like Mariah. She didn't chase independence like Micah. She stayed in the room and told the truth, which, in its own way, was even more radical. Looking back, it's easy to see that Lydia's words were more than just a gentle reminder at a wedding. They were a spotlight shining on the heart of the Plath family's struggles. Gossip wasn't just background noise. It was the glue that kept the cycle of control intact. And when Lydia finally broke that silence, she showed everyone, her parents, her siblings, and the audience at home, that love can't survive in whispers. For years, the family narrative had been controlled by those who spoke the loudest or gossiped the most. Kim and Barry used it to hold on to power. Siblings used it to vent frustration, and fans saw it play out like a never-ending loop. Lydia's quiet rebellion mattered because it disrupted that loop. By choosing honesty, she exposed gossip as the very thing tearing them apart, not the thing holding them together. That's why fans connected with her so deeply. So many people watching could relate. Maybe you've been in a family where no one talks directly, where everything is twisted into side conversations and judgments. Lydia gave voice to something universal, the courage to step out of silence without losing kindness. So what do you think? Was Lydia's stand the beginning of change for the Plath family, or just a moment that will fade? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to keep following these raw, emotional moments, make sure you subscribe to Inside Hollywood Couples.